Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our event. We are going to be talking about the history of Juneteenth today, and Juneteenth, a celebration of freedom. Our speaker today is Dr. Meredith May, who is originally from Huntington, Texas. She received her BA from Stephen F. Austin State University and her MA and PhD from Texas Christian University here in Fort Worth. She has been an adjunct instructor for TCC since 2014, and in 2017, she joined the full-time faculty at Kilgore College, where she has continued her research interests in East Texas and post-1945 U.S. history. It's my 2-year-old. She is a former research assistant for the Civil Rights in Black and Brown Oral History Project, a current board member for the Gregg County Historical Museum, and is on the editorial board for the East Texas Historical Journal. She's also on the steering committee of Longview's 1919 Remembrance Project, a documentary project examining the 1919 Longview race riot, and I'm very excited to hear more about that as well. So thank you, Meredith, for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. May, and we look forward to hearing more about the history of Juneteenth with you today.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and get the slides up so you can see some visual aids. So thank you for the introduction. Okay, hopefully everybody can see what I see. So today we're going to be talking about the origins of Juneteenth, as well as how it came to be a federal holiday, which is, as most of you probably know, a fairly recent thing. So we're going to begin at the beginning. So the origins of Juneteenth begin with the historical context of the Emancipation Proclamation. As, again, most of you probably know, the Emancipation Proclamation was issued during the Civil War by President Abraham Lincoln. So it is officially issued on January 1st of 1863. And there's multiple reasons why we see the Emancipation Proclamation put into effect. Quite a bit of it has to do with African Americans and the war. So Lincoln, by the end of 1862, was convinced that this war needed to have emancipation as one of its goals, but he needs a military victory in order to kind of bolster that. And that victory comes in the Battle of Antietam in September of 1862. So 3 days after the Battle of Antietam, Lincoln warns the Southern states that they have 100 days to return to the Union, or the Union Army is going to emancipate slaves everywhere in the South they could reach. When the South obviously does not meet that deadline, we see that Lincoln goes forward with the Emancipation Proclamation. So what does this have to do with African Americans and fighting the war? So in July of 1862, the federal Congress, realizing that they need more people to fight the war, passes an act that recognizes the, quote, indispensable military necessity of recruiting African American men for the North. So this act allows the president to recruit former slaves for the Union Army. So we see with the passage of the Emancipation Proclamation and this idea of it being about, as we see in this painting, freedom to the slave, we see recruiting begin in earnest of African American men into the Union Army. So some 175 regiments comprising more than 178,000 free African Americans and former enslaved people joins the Union Army. This, to give you some perspective on the numbers, that's about 10% of the total Union Army. And they fought in every major campaign of the war's final years. And Lincoln acknowledges this contribution. He says, without the military help of the Black freedmen, the war against the South could not have been won. So the proclamation allows for this recruitment, allows for even more African American men to serve in this war with the idea that it is being fought for freedom. Here's the thing about the Emancipation Proclamation, though. It declares the freedom of enslaved African Americans in the Confederate States, but its enforcement is slow and uneven across the country. And so in Texas, news takes a while to arrive. So June 19th, 1865, this is the big day. It has a significant place in history as the day that Major General Gordon Granger arrives in Galveston, Texas, and announces General Order Number 3. This declares that all enslaved people in Texas are free. And we're talking about, in Texas alone, 250,000 people, 250,000 people. So it's, as far as we know, the last place, this last state to get this news. And you can see here the full order, that all slaves are free, that they have absolute equality of rights and rights of property, and the connections that existed between them in terms of enslavement no longer exist. Now, there is kind of some more to that, though. So if you keep reading, it says that freedmen are advised to remain where they're working and to work for wages, and that they're not going to be supported in idleness. But the main thing here is that there is freedom for enslaved people in Texas. And so that's how we get Juneteenth, June 19th, marking this momentous occasion. It becomes immediately on that day a time of jubilation and celebration for all of these people, and particularly as it spreads throughout the rest of Texas. So early celebrations of Juneteenth typically involved, they begin with religious services, usually family gatherings. Sometimes, particularly in the early years, we see annual pilgrimages to Galveston by former enslaved people and their families. We see in quite a few cities and towns, African Americans purchase land in order to have these celebration parks. They tend to be called emancipation parks. For example, in 1872, we see a group of African American leaders purchase 10 acres in Houston to be Emancipation Park, where we have the Juneteenth celebrations. So you have these community gatherings, you have picnics, there's educational events. They look different in different places. They tend to be organized by churches, and then these local leaders, historical reenactors, and in general cultural activities. In terms of the broader context, the early years of Juneteenth are happening in a period in which we are seeing these white supremacists in leadership trying to and succeeding in creating an oppressive system of Jim Crow, segregation. So we are seeing all of that put into place. And there are some accounts of Juneteenth activities being interrupted and halted by white landowners in rural areas, demanding laborers return to work. However, it seems that most employers do allow their workers the day off. And we see, even in this era of Jim Crow in the South, we see sometimes, particularly big company owners, contributing to the festivities. So for example, in Diboll, Texas, which is in kind of deep East Texas, it's kind of like 2 hours to an hour and a half north of Houston. So Diboll is a company town, and it's owned by a lumber company. The owner of the town and the lumber company, from basically whenever the company begins in the 1890s, and again, he's white, he donated the food and the space for the annual celebration. And not just that, he and other white town leaders gave speeches during the programming and would invite people to come and speak. So in 1951, as you can see in this photo, there's actually a congressman, a federal congressman, who is invited and speaks to the crowd. For decades, we see these celebrations grow and flourish. They become very large. The biggest that we have kind of tracked is Mahia. So Mahia often had 20,000 or more people coming to celebrate each year. So we see a little bit of an ebb in terms of people celebrating Juneteenth. That kind of coincides with the Depression. And then in the 50s, the civil rights movement sparks an expansion of Juneteenth. And not just do we see the celebrations in Texas get bigger, it's during the civil rights movement that we see Juneteenth expand outside of Texas and into parts of the country that had not previously experienced these celebrations. In a lot of cases, this was civil rights workers, so people who were affiliated with organizations like SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They would come to the South to do voter registration drives or participate in things like the Freedom Rides. And when they came to Texas, as well as some parts of Louisiana that celebrated Juneteenth, they take that idea back with them to whatever state they had come from. So we start to see a push for more recognition of Juneteenth as an official holiday, which brings us back to Fort Worth to Opal Lee. So Opal Lee plays a really pivotal role in advocating for Juneteenth to be recognized as a federal holiday. So some background on Opal Lee. She was born in 1927 in Marshall, Texas, which is just down this road from where I'm currently at right now. She was primarily raised in Fort Worth, though, and she witnessed firsthand the challenges and injustices faced by African Americans during that period. In June 1939, her parents bought a house in the 900 block of East Annie Street, which is at the time, a mostly white area of Fort Worth. On June 19th, so Juneteenth, 500 white rioters vandalized and burned down her home. She was 12 at the time, so very much old enough to pay attention, to be aware of it. And recalling it years later, she said, quote, "The fact that it happened on the 19th day of June has spurred me to make people understand that Juneteenth is not just a festival." So Juneteenth doesn't just represent barbecues and picnics. It's about freedom. It is about emancipation from oppression. So in her 80s, she embarked on a mission to raise awareness about Juneteenth and its historical significance. At the age of 89, she began a 1,400-mile walk from her home here in Texas to Washington, D.C. And you can see on the map what her route looked like. So you can see what those 1,400 miles actually looked like. And her journey garnered attention, support. It raises awareness about Juneteenth and the need for its recognition. And it inspires other people to advocate for it to become a federal holiday. Now, I should note, by this point in time, Texas recognized it as a holiday, but we don't have it as a federal holiday. So we see the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act introduced and passed by Congress, largely as a result of Opal Lee's movement. And it becomes, on June 17th, 2021, a federal holiday. President Joe Biden signed the bill into law, and you can see here Opal Lee at the signing. It marks this national day, national observance of emancipation and of freedom. So, in conclusion, this is a celebration of freedom, as the title of this presentation says, that embodies struggles, resilience, and triumphs throughout history. And particularly Opal Lee's relentless advocacy as a crucial role in ensuring that it does become the federal holiday. Now, I do want to open the floor for any questions, comments. Feel free to share your thoughts on Juneteenth, different ways perhaps that maybe you've participated in it being celebrated.
Thank you so much. I like this idea about it being driven from Texas. Can you kind of maybe talk a little bit more about how people continue to celebrate this in different places and how it's kind of maybe, you said in different places it's celebrated in different ways, and how are we seeing it maybe celebrated in other places versus Texas? Because I have seen a few years ago, a historian who is in DC, and she's this Instagram influencer, posted, I don't remember ever hearing about Juneteenth, and being from Texas, I had heard about it, but I did feel like it had a resurgence lately versus maybe in the past. So can you speak a little bit on that? And I mean, if that is Opal-Lee directly, or if there's other things as well at play.
Okay, so in terms of within Texas itself, Juneteenth celebrations are actually a little bit more similar today in terms of what they looked like, the general events, than they were earlier. So today, most cities have a parade. There's something that's fairly consistent. There's some sort of parade or kind of a larger gathering in a park. That does bear a lot of similarities to the past. Didn't see a lot of parades in the 1890s, early 1900s, as these are really starting to take shape. But the party at a park, that has been pretty standard. Now in rural communities, they don't have necessarily a central gathering place that's not a church. And so in rural communities, it was largely the churches up until fairly recently that took the lead. And so they had a little bit more of a religious bent, and they felt more like a religious revival than what we see in larger towns and cities. So that's kind of the difference within Texas. Outside of Texas, so it basically wasn't celebrated anywhere other than Texas and eastern Louisiana. You do see it, for example, Natchitoches was celebrating it fairly early. So some parts of Louisiana were. But outside of that area, you don't really see it start to spread an awareness until the 60s. And even then, it's not places you would think. So for example, we don't really see it acknowledged in Chicago, but we do see it acknowledged in Minnesota. And we start to see these kind of small celebrations as the civil rights movement gains steam. Then not really much. And then, yes, we do see a resurgence, and it's been fairly recently. I think a lot of that can be attributed to the summer of 2020 and this, the movements that we see surrounding the death of George Floyd and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. I think that did a lot to galvanize. So all of the things that summer coincides with Juneteenth. And I think that was a little bit of a connection there.
I feel like I started hearing a lot more about that in those kind of moments for sure. So we have a question from the audience, okay, and it says, with the success of Juneteenth, do you think that there might be a movement to make Cinco de Mayo a federal holiday too? So far, it seems like an excuse to get drunk and enforce stereotypes, and the 5th of May isn't even an actual Independence Day. So do you think it could be broadened, and perhaps that could be something that happens in the future here?
Possibly. I think that it would take what we saw with Juneteenth in terms of a full-blown educational movement, because Opal-Lee's walk wasn't just, I'm going to do this walk and it's going to be so impressive people will pay attention to that. There was an educational component that went along with it. About what Juneteenth is. And I think the problem with Cinco de Mayo is that most, as was pointed out, most people don't know what it's about. It's not an Independence Day. It's not even a Liberation Day in the sense that Juneteenth is. As they said, it's an excuse to eat tacos and drink margaritas. So if there's an educational component to it, I think that there would perhaps be more of a push, but I think you've got to get the education out there first.
Definitely. And so we are in Fort Worth, where Opal Lee is from, and there have been talks about having a museum in Fort Worth, and I know that it has been approved. Is there any information that you might know to share with us about that?
I actually don't have any more information other than it seems to be going forward. About the museum, I'm very excited. It would make sense for Fort Worth to house that museum, considering it's Opal Lee's. It's not birthplace, but her primary place of residence where she was raised, and also where that moment happens on Juneteenth for her when she's 12 years old. That really kind of galvanizes her in terms of her thoughts about Juneteenth. So that does make a lot of sense.
Yes, and I mean, I think coming from Fort Worth, and we're here at TCC right now, it's an awesome opportunity, I think, to be part of something really special, but also really, I think, like something that's now nationwide, to be the hub for something like that. I'm really excited about that for our community and what that will do for our own students to be able to visit a place like that and learn. So this is, I think, it's on topic, but a little off topic. Could you tell us a little bit more about the project that you're involved in, the 1919 project out in East Texas?
Absolutely. So 1919 is often called Red Summer. So in 1919, there was 25 race riots across the nation. This was largely in reaction to returning African-American veterans from World War I. So there was a lot of fear here in the South in particular, but actually all across the nation, because 2 of the 25 riots is Chicago and DC. So this isn't just a Southern thing. But there's fear that returning veterans are going to come back and not return to their places of subservience, that they might be leaders in a stronger push for civil rights. And so these riots are usually provoked by some sort, as most of these incidences are, by some sort of allegation of impropriety. So an African-American man doing something to or with a white woman. We see that here in Longview. So there was a returning veteran, African-American man from Longview, who had, from all accounts, from what we can gather, a consensual relationship with a white woman from Kilgore, which is just down the road. And it was found out. He was arrested because those sorts of relationships were illegal in the South. And he was taken from the jail and lynched. Someone here in Longview from the African-American community wrote about it. It was published in the Chicago Defender, an African-American newspaper. They blamed a local African-American school teacher, and because he was a distributor for the Defender. He was attacked, he was beaten at the courthouse, and told to leave town. When he didn't, a white mob formed and marched on the African-American side of town and burned it to the ground. In terms of Longview's riot, there's one fatality. It's an African-American man who was shot in the back while fleeing from police. That's the only fatality. In Chicago, you see much higher numbers in terms of casualties, but it really hasn't been spoken about here in Longview. It's one of the only things Longview appears in textbooks for, and yet there's no historical marker, almost no acknowledgement of it. When I teach it in class, these students who are from Longview or Kilgore often have never heard of it. And so I met quite a few other people who were interested in doing more to bring awareness to it. So we applied for and got, or will get soon, a historical marker. It's been approved by the state. And we're working on a documentary. And we have had questions from people whenever we've talked about it in meetings around town. You know, why are you doing this? It's just opening up a raw wound. The thing is, as a result of the race riot, the African-American community in Longview had to basically go under like a cone of silence. So in terms of pushing for rights or pushing for anything, it's you don't see that until really the civil rights movement has taken off. There was also a massive loss of leadership. Most of the people whose houses were burned down, they are the local African American leaders. They are the business owners. They are those who were active, and they leave. And so the long-term effects on the African American community were immense. And so this isn't, just this one moment and we're just digging it up just because. If we're going to have any sort of racial reconciliation in places like Longview, we have to acknowledge these issues that laid the foundation. So we're going to have educational components with it, where we'd like to see it in schools, shown in schools, particularly the local schools, since it happened here. So yeah, it's exciting. We do have funding. We just hired a director, and we're going to have filming go underway in the fall.
That is so exciting. I'm really excited. I can't wait to hear more about that. And I think it's such a wonderful thing for us to be looking at local history around us and kind of seeing how these big events are playing, just in our own backyards. And I'm excited for our own students to maybe go out and get excited about what's around here in our communities as well. One final question. So some states did not participate in Juneteenth, and particularly Mississippi apparently does not officially commemorate this holiday. So my question is, what is the future of some federal holidays if some states don't observe them?
Well, I think that what you're seeing in places like Mississippi is, so your leadership isn't acknowledging it, participating in it. In fact, Mississippi has, as several other southern states do, a Confederate Heritage Day that they celebrate instead, or rather emphasize instead. They can't stop their constituents from participating in it, though. So I think that it speaks more to these culture wars that are happening and this politicization, that as long as it's getting pushed back on, again, these people who are in Mississippi who are still, and I'd have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure there were still some Juneteenth celebrations. They're just not done by the state officials. Again, the states can't stop, state leadership can't stop you from participating in these events. They just won't be putting their official mark on it. So it's sad that particularly Mississippi, who, what year was it that they finally got around to ratifying the 13th Amendment? It's been within my lifetime. So
maybe not entirely shocking, some of these states, that these culture wars are still present.
Yeah, I don't find it surprising. And I think it speaks to kind of return to a broader point here. These things that happened long ago, they still very much have an impact on us today. That's why understanding what Juneteenth is and what it signifies, and this idea that we're not free until everybody's free, which is kind of the underlying idea of Juneteenth. Why do we celebrate Juneteenth but not January 1st? Because that was the Emancipation Proclamation, right? Not everybody's free. January 1st, 1863. So understanding that educational component, that helps us push back whenever people say things like, why should we celebrate that? Or I'm not going to celebrate that. That doesn't apply to me. So.
No, that's wonderful. And thank you so much. I've learned so much today myself, and it was just great to kind of see the history of this holiday now, and especially to be able to think more about how it has a local connection with us here in Fort Worth. All right, so let's all give our virtual applause to Dr. Meredith May, and please stay tuned for more of our events that we're doing here on virtually and on campuses at TCC. There is a link to get credit here, and if you are watching this virtually later, There will be a link as well for you to get attendance credit. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm glad we got to learn more about this holiday, and let's keep an eye out for any news about any groundbreaking and anything for the museum here in Fort Worth. We're all very excited for that. Thank you all and have a great day.